My name is Luba.
Luba.
My maiden name is Zach.
Mhm.
I am from the Ukraine, shtetl Chudnov-Volynsk. It's not far from Kiev.
Mhm.
And the next major city is Zhytomyr. It's a very little shtetl, little city. I just read on the internet that in 39 the statistics was 44,000 altogether people in that little city.
And what kind of people lived in the city? What was kind of the ethnic backgrounds?
There was a lot of Jews. Probably majority were Jews. Different trades, and there were Ukrainian people and there were Polish people too. My parents, it was arranged marriage for them. They were kids from the revolution time. My father was born in 1893, and he came from a very wealthy family. They owned a lot of wood fields. And there were factories also placed in that place, which they owned. And they were very rich. And of course, when the revolution came, everything was taken away, and they became just nobody on the street, especially the kids. My father had 2 brothers, 2 sisters. They had no trades. They were all in business of the parents' business. And so it was pretty bad situation for them. So everybody just disappeared from that area. My father, being the oldest child in that family, he had to stay with his parents and watch out for them. That's my father's. Yeah, one of the brothers, my father's brother, emigrated to America, somehow traveled, and he made his way to America. One sister went to Argentina. And the youngest brother and the middle sister, another sister, they went to Kiev, being a bigger city, looking for more opportunities than in a smaller place. My mother, she was born to a family very religious. Yes, and my father also was in a very religious family. Was observed probably all the holidays with their very particular little details. Everything was observed in both families. So my mother was born also to a very wealthy family. Her parents owned a leather factory, and of course everything was taken away. It started from 1915, when the first gangs were forming, and any gang comes in the little shtetl, they set their rules and they demand from the Jews everything what was there in the house and what.
What year was this?
That was started from 1915, and going on to 20s probably. All this uncertainty was.
Is this communist gangs or is it
communist? But they weren't coming in with one idea. One gang comes in and has this idea, and the others leave because being defeated by the others. There were different movements. It's not only one movement with the communists started. That wasn't one opinion. And so everything was taken from them, and my grandfather was left with 7 daughters and a sick wife, and not having, not a house, nothing. Everything was taken, of course. So my mother, being the oldest child again in the family, she had to watch out for the rest of the family. And when she was 23 years old, at that time it was, girls were getting married sooner than nowadays. She was introduced to my father, and they got married. Now, both of them, because they came from wealthy families, they were taking away the right to vote, taking away the right to work anywhere, and not going to school, nothing. They had to provide living for their families, however it was happening, working daily on the streets, helping somebody, but no profession was given the opportunity to gain any professions, and not going to school and not voting, and that was for both of them. And so when my parents got married, right away in 3 years they had 3 children. I came kind later, 10 years after the third one. So it was a very difficult time for them to have another child, where in the house there wasn't a piece of bread. For Shabbos, if my father could provide a small piece of bread with a bottle of yogurt, that was a lucky Friday evening. It was terrible. And at this time, war started when I was 5 years old. We were super poor. I mean, there was no food at all. My older sister had to leave the house and move to Kyiv to look for a job to gain any trade. She was done with 7 years in school, so she could go to a technicum, trade school. And so my brother, who is next year born after my older sister, also went to Kyiv to gain somewhat of a trade. And this time started the war. When the war started, we didn't have any information what's happening in the world. The only thing, luckily, you get to know a war started, because radio was an exclusive commodity to have. Newspapers, you had to pay for them, and the family wasn't gonna spend on that the money. So anyway, my point is, there was no information what Hitler does and what is the war about. Just maybe 2-3 days into the war, a family came to our house, and that was a relative of my parents' relative, who came running from the border in the West. And they knew what's happening in the world, because they ran away from that situation. And they told us that Hitler hates Jews. Hitler is killing Jews. You have to leave. How could we leave when we have a 70-year-old grandma and grandpa who are not good health-wise, of course, and my mother had asthma that she was always in lying down. She could not work, she could not walk, she could not do anything. There was no treatment for that. This family insisted for us to go. We didn't want to leave the grandparents since they were at this age, but my grandparent, my grandpa said, I am 70 years old. Who will say a bad word of me? Everybody knows me in this city, knows how many good things I was doing, and that's true. If any traveler was coming to this city and needed a home to stay over, that was the place. If the rabbi couldn't do the services at a certain time, he was the one who was doing the services. A very known, my grandpa was a very known and honorable man. It hurts me talking about them. And so they refused to come with us. We did not have anything to take with us. We had no clothes. We had nothing to take with us. So on the road would be safe for us to have. This family, I didn't say, they came with horse buggy. And they were with one child. So we went with them, and we took nothing but 2 pillows. That's all we had to take with us. And, of course, traveling created a lot of difficulties with bad health of my mother, and I am being only 5 years old. I just had a month into the 6th year when the war started. I remember a picture that I would like to talk about. When we were traveling on that horse buggy, we needed the road, of course, and on that road it was a lot of military men and a lot of people carrying what they had, the little things what they had carrying with them. And the movement on the road was so slow, and what usually was happening is the German airplanes would fly over in spot where it's a lot of people, and that's where they were dropping the bombs. I remember a picture when one of the many times that happened to us. I was only 5 years old, but that stuck in my mind so vivid. I just see it, the airplanes coming down to the ground and dropping those big bombs. Everybody at that moment, of course, just ran wherever they saw or lay down on the roads. We ran into the woods. Into the woods, or if the woods were far from to run to, there were fields with fields with corn, with it was June month, and hiding in those fields, just lying down. And after it was over, you hear all those cry, yelling, calling names. One was looking for another. And I remember the parts of the bodies that were on the road, just lying there. And the relatives that found those bodies, their cry over those relatives, it was terrible, terrible, and I cannot get rid of those memories. It's just stuck in my mind. Another fly of the German airplanes brought us to running to a little village that was by. And my mother always kept me under her body, close to her body. She was always saying, if anything happens, I wanted to get at me, then you. I want to go first. And we came to a little orchard that was adjoined to the house. And so my mother was crawling over me, and I was taught already how to crawl at that time. And we crawled into a house. Yeah, I remember standing there, a woman, and combing the hair of a younger woman, apparently a mother and a daughter. Long black hair, and she combed that hair. When she saw us, that we appeared in the door, she started to scream, "Go away, it's only because of you. They are coming and doing this to us. We don't need them, but we don't need you, so you attract all this..."
Meaning Jews.
Yeah, blaming Jews. It's because of the Jews who runs away from their places and come to our places. That's why Germans do this to us, to our houses. So my mother grabbed me, and we went back to the orchard to hide under the taller trees. And all of a sudden, a bomb came to that house. And just everything flew and it hit us, but that house disappeared. And meanwhile, I want to mention about my grandparents that were left in that city. It didn't take a long time, just a few days, until the Nazis came to that city. The first thing what they did, they pulled all the Jews to the main road and were sending them to the local park. This we found out later after the war when we came back, that my grandma, she just was very resisting and didn't want to walk in that crowd. And so the police, and a lot of them were local police, mostly from the Polish people, we were told. They were keeping those crowds on the street and pulling from every house. And the local people were saying, there is a Jew, there is a Jew, there is a Jew. And so they were going into the houses and pulling out those people to the road. And my grandma, she probably lost her mind from the horror. So she wasn't agreeing with all this, what's happening. And they beat her a lot with those with a stick with a long
A whip.
With a whip, yeah. They beat her a lot, and this how they kept the crowd on the road, aiming to the park. This told us people when we came back. They told us this story. It was terrible. My grandfather, he was submissive. He understood what's happening, and I'm sure that in his mind, he was sorry what he said to us when we were leaving. We didn't want to leave without us, but he was saying, what are you talking about? I am over 70. Your grandma is 70 years old. Who will touch us, old people? Who doesn't know us? Everybody knows us in the surrounding, and we are known as only good things doing people, and nobody would hurt us. Well, they were pulled to the park, to the local park, and the Nazis and the policemen, who mostly Polish people, who sympathized the Nazis, they made lines of the Jews in front of yard.
It's like a ditch.
Like a ditch, but the ditch was
a ravine. I think it's a ravine, right?
Probably a ravine, was long in the park. They formed several lines. The stronger man was made to dig ditches, and when the ditches were dug, the next line was supposed to push the front line into the ditches, and there were line by lines with Jews who were pushed into that ditch. You'll say, of course, there were people who were resisting, that's for sure, but they were killed immediately. So next one found a way to live a few minutes longer and did what was asked.
Was it a very long ravine?
It was a long...
So they fell to their deaths?
Yes. No. And so it continued the first day, and there was another day when it was done the same thing. People were telling us when we came in 1947, when we came back to Chudnov, that's the shtetl name. People were telling us that for several days the ground was shaking from still alive people being just slightly with ground covered. So not everybody were dead and were hit by others ones falling over them, and so created a mess grave. And then the last line pushed ground on with shovels on the people that were pushed into that ravine. And so my grandparents were buried there. It was a terrible sight. They were saying several days the ground was going in waves, but the police was around, and whoever trying to escape from that grave was shot. But they had the better chance than the ones that were pushed to that grave.
Did some people escape?
Very few who later told the story. And so, with my grandparents being in that bratskaya могила,
Mass grave.
Was their youngest daughter that was a teacher. She didn't want to come with us when we were leaving because she said they are older people, I'm not leaving them. And so she went with them. We had the story that she was hiding in a outhouse bathroom, sitting there, but somebody just pointed at her, and she was pulled from there, and so she went with the same crowd that the grandparents did. And so they say 6,000 people had the grave in that park. The ground was shaking several days. The очевидцы, witnesses were saying were happening to us. Later on, of course, we were changing to trains, whatever opportunity there was to run away from the situation, since Hitler was right after us. And our goal was to get away from the military, because this is what they were looking for from their airplanes, to hit the military. And so we used the train. Of course, it wasn't the comfortable train. It was the train that the animals were transported other times. And so many people were on the train. I remember this. Since I was little, 5 years old only at that time, someone had to hold me on their hands. There was no place to sit down. If you would sit down, you would be suffocated by the crowd. That crowded were the little train, the carts were so crowded with people, just one stood next to another. And by that time, I also remember in my 5-year-old memory what kept the memory, because it was so terrible. People were eaten up by lice. People were hungry. Everybody was screaming and crying about their relatives, moms, dads that they left behind. But yet people had to save their children, like in our case with me, I was the little child in the family. And so we were in that train for days and days traveling, no water, no food, nothing. And every time the airplanes were coming down, the German airplanes, if they see a train, of course they had to bomb those trains. So we could hear the trains were coming, so the train would stop and everybody runs away anywhere to hide, just to be not visible, since they knew that bombs will be flying into the trains. And so did we several times, but what happens, not everybody makes back to the train afterwards. Who is slower, who is sick, who is older, they couldn't make it to the trains in time when the train decides to go. There was no announcements or anything. And that happened with our mom, my mom, that the train all of a sudden took off, and in the train was my mom and my dad holding me in the hands. And a lot of people were left behind. And so people were screaming, people were desperate. They lost even those people that they had already with them. And just, I cannot get rid of those pictures. It's stuck in my mind and very vivid. I just see it. In bad times, I see it more often, of course, but I understand you have to go. You have to let go of the past, of course. And so we, by train or by foot, we went, we advanced our way east, of course. And so mostly by foot. As long we were separated a little bit from the Germans stepping behind us, we were walking towards the Urals area. And for a long time, of course, before we reached that area, we came to Urals and we came to Kazakhstan, and that's where we settled for the war until the war was over. So when the war started, our family was kind of separated because my two older sisters and my brother, they were at that time when the war started in Kiev, which it was not far from our shtetl, probably 4 or 5 hours by train. And they were going to college. My sister was in nurses college. My brother was in a college where he was obtaining a trade. And the third sister, and they were a year apart one from another, also was with them at this time in Kiev, living with my father's uncle, who was living at that time just in one little room with 3 children, but giving home to his brother's 3 children. This how family ties were very strong. And when the war started, all of a sudden we know nothing, we couldn't hear anything, we knew nothing about the rest of our family. there was no way to know what happens to the rest of our family at that time. As it turned out, my father was 14 years old at that time.
Your brother.
My brother, I'm sorry, my brother, who was given my two sisters and my brother, they went to my uncle, my father's brother who lived in Kiev, and he gave room for them to stay and get education there. And when the war started, my brother, who was 14 years old, went to the authorities and said that he is older and went to the army. And he was only 14 years old. And so he went through the whole war until the war was over and he came home. Thanks God, only wounded, of course, but he is safe. And my two sisters, they went with their colleges to other places. And my older sister, who was in medical field, she went to the army, to the front line. But we didn't know anything about them. And so our family, my parents, with me being 5 years old, they traveled by foot, mostly by foot, until they came to Kazakhstan. And there they lived to the end of the war.
What was it like in Kazakhstan?
In Kazakhstan, I have to say that as much my memory keeps it, and of course I was a child, they were very friendly to us. They gave us a home, not having much themselves, but they gave us a home. So they were Russian-looking people that were somehow they emigrated to that part.
So they were Cossacks.
War. They were Cossacks.
I see. Okay.
Not Kazakhs.
Okay.
Cossacks. And as a matter of fact, it just happened. My mother was pregnant at that time. And she miscarried. And I remember how this Cossack woman helped her. And I witnessed all the procedure, how she washed her hands and not having any education, but she helped to clean her uterus with her hand and saving her life. But so I want to make a point that my memory saves the moments that we were helped there. And of course we had to make our own living over there. Everybody was hungry, everybody had nothing to eat, of course. And so we were finding ways to help ourselves, like walking the fields and collecting the kolaski с пшеницей. And what we were wearing aprons, and including me, of course, 5 years old, we were wearing aprons and were collecting the grain into that apron and then putting in a certain place. And at night time, we were beating on that grain and extracting the pure grain so it cleans up from the
From the
straw,
shoot.
From the shoot. I remember also one time, all of a sudden, fire was in our house because there wasn't electricity, of course. There was a little lamp formed from a little oil with a little material, and that was burning barely, so you see the shine at night. And all of us were beating on that grain to extract the seeds, and a fire happened, I remember, and everything went to flames, but thank God we remained alive somehow.
But the house burnt up.
Of course.
For the army?
Yeah. My brother, he lived in Kiev. He lived in Kiev together with my sister, getting an education. And so when the war started, he went to the army, lying about his age.
Right.
And he was a scout in the army since he was so young. He was going to villages, to occupied places, and looking what happens on the German portion, on the German side, and coming back and everything, reporting the results of his findings.
Were there any stories that he told you about?
He doesn't like to talk about. The memories were so hard for him, being only 14 years old.
He must have seen the Germans do a lot of bad things.
He saw a lot, of course, but he doesn't like to talk about. And he went all the war through, and he was награжден, awarded with a lot of medals for his achievements in being so brave.
Was he in Ukraine the whole time?
No, he actually went to Berlin.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, he went all through the war and being a child still. And meanwhile, we didn't know anything about him, and so we didn't know about our sisters too.
Was he a scout the whole time?
Yes.
Until he was 19?
Not the latest years.
Mm-hmm.
I don't remember what he was saying. What kind of... no, I don't remember what he was saying. But the first few years, this is what he was doing, and only 14 years old.
What about your aunt that was a nurse or doctor on the front line? Or your sister, sorry.
Oh, sister.
Yeah.
My sister, she was in the regular army. Mm-hmm. And of course, she didn't know anything about the family, and we didn't know anything about her.
Did she make it back?
Yeah. I remember the tears and the weeping of my parents, not knowing where the kids are. That was terrible, knowing what's happening in the world. And by that time, we knew already from newspapers, from the radio. We had a radio. What Germans do to Jewish population. We were very worried about the kids not knowing where they are and what they are doing. But my sister, since she was in a medical school, Before the war, she went directly to the war lines, and she was in active duty there. And she was by that time 18 years old. Yeah. And so she had a lot of stories of that, but we didn't know anything about her too. And we ended up being placed in a little factory zone in Kazakhstan where the weather is very, very severe. So severe that I remember how we were tying ropes in between houses in order to find a way to from one house to another
Through the snow.
through the snow. Such a snow, the houses were not very tall either, but the snow was taller, forming taller hills than the houses are. There were organizations that helped to find each other. First, we found our sister, and shortly she came to the location where we were, and that was in Uralsk, to that factory. And she came and joined us, and as a matter of fact, she received a position as a nurse practitioner at that region. She was responsible for miles and miles surrounding. She was called to sick people and helping them, and also she was responsible for this little place where we were located. She was very well known and very loved by the population over there. But we didn't know yet about the brother, and also there was organization where you write letters, and they look for people, because the other people who are still alive, they are asking also for their relatives and being matched. This how it was organization who was finding the people. And so she came, and I was only 5 years old, maybe by that time 6 years old, and I was the little nurse that was locally employed, because she was mostly having patients somewhere, deliveries and so on, where she had to go and give help. Where I was locally, we even had a room where her office was, with the medications and all this stuff. And I was meeting people that at the factory where we were located were injuries every day, and I was handling them. And this is honestly, I'm saying, because I was always with her. As a matter of fact, I was calling her mama, because my mother at that time, she was close to, she was over 40. And so I wanted a young mother, apparently. I was calling her mom too.
So you were helping her. What kind of stuff did you do?
Injuries, mostly injuries. Deliveries, there wasn't any deliveries. There were no men around, you know.
So it's all women, pretty much the whole city?
Mostly. My father was with us though, because he had bad vision.
Bad what?
Vision.
Oh, vision. Okay.
Yeah. And so he wasn't taken into the war. He needed even help to walk short distances.
Wow.
This how he was. We don't know what disease he had till now. We don't know, but I would imagine that was a glaucoma probably problem that he had. So he wasn't in the war.
Did they teach you? Were you like being taught school or anything like that?
I was yet not school age, so but I was pretty useful to helping sick people. When my sister was absent on calls, I was there when some emergencies were coming up. And that's how I became a lover of helping people, and eventually I became a nurse.
How did you get back to Kiev or to Ukraine?
How did we? When the war was over and in 47, most of the families were returning home. And so we had no knowledge what happened at home. And we just wanted to get home, that's all. And there was a way to travel long time, and we went back to where we lived in Shtetl by the name Chudnov.
What did you find when you got back?
The house was almost nothing. We had to build it up, everything with our hands, of course. No food, nothing. I didn't manage. I didn't mention before that since my parents were from wealthy families coming out from the revolution, even by that time they were not supposed to have any jobs. And so all the time, my parents, when they had families, they could not obtain a job.
They were not allowed.
So not only did they take everything away from the rich, it's not like they made it equal. You were now less than equal. We
were less than other population because we were my parents were the children of rich people, and so they were treated different. It was very difficult to provide food for the family, for my parents, and my mother was very, very ill. Which the war was over in 45. Nothing was done to that place yet.
Were you able to talk about it? What happened?
Not much talk about. It wasn't the worst what can happen, because every family, there was not a family that wasn't hurt by losing members of the family, and so we were the same. Later on, when we got together, and pretty soon we found our brother who was looking for us as well as we were looking for him, and we found him also, and we knew that he is alive. And At that time, we knew that he went through the war from the very beginning to the very last, and still stayed in the army a few years longer.
So did all of you move to Kiev after that?
From there, our older daughter got sister, of course. My older sister, Poля, she got married by that time, and she moved to Moldova, to her husband's location. And we moved to Chudnov.
Tell the story.
I want to tell the story mostly for my children, for them to have memory of the family and have memory of us as grandparents, and to honor the closeness that a family takes during bad times, and we survived only because of the support of each other. And I would be appreciated if it has longer life than from this room, my little story, although I have a lot more to say, maybe another time. Thank you very much.